we've made a number of requests to the applicant, and we're not going to act on this application tonight. My feeling is that we've had a pretty good airing of a lot of issues, and we should wait and see what the Board of Appeals does. I'd be happy to go to that hearing, or someone else could, and just do a report on what occurred tonight, and see what the Board of Appeals does, and then we can resume this hearing on the 20th.
22nd.
The 22nd, which seems reasonable.
So continue to 6:45 on the 22nd?
I think that that's what we should do. Bill, what do you think?
Okay.
Are we meeting on January 8th, Al? Yeah.
We are, but that is going to be the Thayer Nursery, and we're not going to do.
Well, they won't have met on ZBA anyway.
Yeah, exactly. It makes more sense to wait for after
It
ZBA.
makes sense
yeah.
to see what the ZBA does.
I hear
yes.
what you
Marion?
say. Yeah.
Two of the Falcones will not be available on the 22nd, but we haven't figured out whether that's an obstacle to meeting then. We have given you a lighting sheet, and we have shown you the location of lights in the parking lot on your plans. So we need to know what else you need. I think you want a spec sheet for the lighting?
Yeah,
fixture,
cut sheet.
please.
Which
Yeah.
we have, we just didn't give it to you.
Okay.
So we will provide that after the hearing, and it will be available then, I guess, at the
And
planning
also
office.
which lights, so you talked in general about leaving certain lights on, and I appreciate there's a state law, but which lights would be left on
And
at
so
which
you,
hours?
and you want a plan or proposal that specifies what the overnight lighting when the restaurant's
Right,
not
exactly.
operating would be like, and how it could be lowered and still provide security, I
Right.
guess.
Exactly.
And, you know, take a look at the entering and exiting lights, because we don't really know where these light beams are going to go from entering and exiting cars at night. But if in fact they're going to go into the windows across the street, then that's something that perhaps could be avoided.
Is there some way of mitigating that?
Yeah, we're not, and we certainly
Well,
are.
I mean,
we're-
if that's not where the lights would go, then, but we do need that information.
We certainly have heard that concern, and we've looked at the entrance and the exit. And it's not to say that we're not going to continue to try to think about it and see what can be done. The reason the entrance and exit are the way they are right now is that it avoids having cars on the street as much, because you have cars enter, it's a one-way street, they enter low in the parking lot, you know, closer to Bassett Street. They enter the parking lot and they park, and then when they leave, they're exiting close to Adams Street. So if there's a sort of waiting period, it's cars in the parking lot waiting to leave their parking spaces. It's not cars lining up in the street. Now, the issue of valet parking, very interesting discussion, because that's right. The downside of valet parking on Church Street is it's going to put all the cars in the Church Street parking lot until they get taken where they're going. The upside of putting them on Adams Street is it's in front, it's on Adams Street, it's the main street. You reduce the amount of cars in the Church Street lot because you're only going to put cars in there that you can put into spaces, and there's a limited amount of spaces there, but you're going to put them in the other lot and to make sure they go to the other lot. That's definitely been discussed. The issue of cooperation with the other restaurant, definitely been discussed. We wanted to know if you like the idea, if the neighbors like the idea, if it doesn't make it better. And we heard a lot of feedback on that tonight, probably more than we did start to talk about that with the Board of Appeals, but haven't fully addressed it. The idea of a valet parking designated space that would also be a delivery space has not been brought up by anybody until Mr. Whiteside mentioned it. That's definitely worth looking at. The town would have to approve that, you realize, because those are public parking spaces right now. So those are I mean, the window design issue, we presumably might be able to come back with some options to show you if that's what you want us to do by the next hearing date that you've established. It wouldn't so much be a discussion with the Board of Appeals, but we could try to submit something and possibly a couple of options, because I could hear different feedback about what would be best. Some people think of a great big window, and some people, some neighbors are not so sure they want the great big window. But the question really is, what would look good and make the side of the building look better?
Yes,
And isn't it?
Yeah,
Is
to
that what we're
Brian's
trying to
point
achieve?
earlier, is it might not have to be windows. It
Right.
might just simply be something that addresses the fact that that's a blank wall,
I think
so.
you made a good point as well,
Yeah.
and I think the designer was nodding his head, and that is, if you want to maintain this theater atmosphere inside, you may need some wall space.
Right, exactly. So what could you do on the
So it doesn't have
outside
to
that would be
windows, it could
attractive?
Something just to make it appealing.
Yeah,
Well, it also can be just phony
Add a
moldings.
square.
Right.
yeah,
I mean, there are all kinds of things to do, and that's the reason you have a designer,
Oh, yeah,
so he
phony
can
windows.
come up with some
Right.
options.
Right, exactly. And he's done a lot of designing, so he's very creative.
and to appreciate also the fact that people don't necessarily want to look from their living room window into somebody eating and certainly don't want somebody eating to look back through their living room window. So there are different ways of addressing that.
And I hate to keep dwelling on the elevations question, but, well, the
it-
engineer understands what you need
Yes.
for elevations. Okay,
Yes,
all right, we don't need to dwell
All
on
right.
it, even though I don't, it doesn't matter. So those are, the dumpster, you also want additional follow-up with detailed description of the dumpster enclosure, and you want a permanent enclosure, you don't want fencing with
And we
vinyl.
want you to look
Definitely not
into
fencing.
then
And high quality.
dumpster characteristics.
And you
What
want
else?
the highest quality
Do they have a
dumpster.
parking lot that are currently using the lights that they anticipate using?
That's a good idea.
I can ask the provider. of
Okay.
lights.
Yeah.
I just like to see them before you have it on a piece of paper and say it's okay.
Right. I mean, one way of talking about the lights that I think I like to use is to say, we have a residential street next to this restaurant. So the lighting should be as residential looking as possible. In other words, we're not looking for street lights at the edge of the parking lot. And then it becomes a question of what design, what aesthetics do people prefer. But it should be as low as possible, as dim as possible, but provide safe lighting. And it should be residential in appearance and in keeping with what people in Milton like, which tends to be sort of, I don't know, colonial or something. I mean, that's probably going too far.
But what I also heard, just to provide some feedback to you, I think if you look at the photometric plan, it appears to me that the spillover is going to be less of an issue than some of the concerns I'm hearing tonight are, you're looking out your second floor window and you're looking at a light fixture and it's glaring in your windows. So is there a way to direct the light down and not have a side light coming out?
Yeah, they
So
should be able to direct it
effectively-
down and away.
Effectively, you're going to shade that light coming out the sides and direct
Yeah.
it all straight down.
Yeah.
Okay, so we will take that back to the lighting, people who are giving us
Yes,
lighting
all
advice.
the lights are able to be equipped with shields for that
Good.
very purpose. So,
Yeah.
yep.
And also the height of the lights is something else we'll want to see. You're not going to need those big Cobra heads up there.
Right.
so.
I just want to make sure that we know what additional information we need to come back with. The question about standing, it's sort of an issue, but the reason we talk about seating capacity in a restaurant is because seating capacity is what's generally used to determine or begin to determine what the parking requirements are. And there are code requirements for a space with seating that will say you can't have more, you're not supposed to have people standing up in a restaurant. You have people sitting somewhere. And I remember from liquor license applications that I've looked at, again, there can be some seating at the bar, and then there's seating at seats, and sometimes the bar seating is for people waiting to get into their seat. But I'll check on what the code requirements are and so forth, but I don't believe you can have people
What?
standing all over the place.
You've got all kinds of bar seats here. Are those a part of the 120? 140?
Should be.
Okay.
Yes.
And so it's just a question of people standing behind the people seated at the bar, and as people are often apt to do on a,
They are. I think I really need to check on what the code requirements are and so forth to be able to say, this is what it's supposed to be, this is how it should be enforced, and then if there is some standing allowed in this amount of floor space, then is that a consideration that we need to take into account?
I do have one final parking question. I know it's under the ZBA, but where will the staff park?
We've said to the ZBA that the staff will be required to park in the zone parking that the town
The service zone
requires
parking.
payment for on an annual basis, and I know that other businesses don't do it the way they should. I can tell you that this restaurant applicant is going to have its employees park in those parking spaces, and they will enforce it with their employees. That could be written as a condition or whatever you want, but we've said that from the beginning.
Site plan approval can actually
I'm sorry?
require that, just like it could require a
They're all over
valet
the place.
parking
They're along
plan.
the expressway, we can,
Good.
we need to get that plan to show where they are, so we can
I
show
have
them.
one more question.
Why don't you come up and,
Go ahead.
and
After the restaurant is closed, what is going to happen with the parking lot? Will it be locked at night? That would be my question. Because
I would
crazy,
assume not, but they,
Why would we lock it? We
Well-
don't lock Franklin Street now.
well, there have been issues in that parking lot. You know, we're going to be living across from it. I mean, things happen in parking lots at
But they park in
night.
there now.
You worried about
They're not
vandalism?
supposed to.
Yeah,
be.
I'm wondering, you know, just crime.
Yep.
I mean, people park there now, but they live there. I mean, the people that park in the lot now are the people that live there. I'm wondering, you know, there's an empty there's going to be empty parking lot at night. Things happen. Just, you know, just a question. You know, I'm concerned about crime.
Kids drinking
Okay.
and vandalizing.
Well, there have been other issues in that lot.
Thank you.
my feeling is that you could have a condition that if there were a crime problem, it would be chained. But,
You could also require security cameras on the exterior of the
Or
building,
a security camera.
so, which might be a little
We have
bit
cameras now
friendlier.
in our
Security cameras, I'm
You've
sure
got a
this one will
security
have.
camera.
Yeah,
We do.
okay.
So there
Good
would be a
condition.
security camera. That would deter people pretty well. Yes.
Good evening. I found this very interesting because I've never watched this process the way I've been watching this one because it is the largest property in East Milton Square. I'm Diane DiTullio Agostino, a town meeting member, as well as a former select person. My question is more one of the process, because when I went to the Board of Appeals meeting, I listened and I heard they had two criteria they were responsible to. I recall parking was their main issue that they approve, and there was something else that I can't recall. And I just thought it would be really good if we left here tonight understanding which committee did what, because at the end of the Board of Appeals meeting, they preferred to wait to hear, not just because they did have a shorter time frame because someone had an obligation, so they didn't get to hear everybody, but they also wanted to hear from the planning board. So I almost felt like, you know, residents as well as the developer and everyone watching at home is getting ping-ponged between two meetings. So if you could explain specifically the process and what, I hear a lot about parking tonight, but if that's under the Board of Appeals, that's really, they will make that decision. So I'd love to hear what your list is that you, as the planning board, has jurisdiction over and can actually address. And another major point is, I really think this town has to have a town-wide, I mean, you've done a great job with the master plan, traffic, and everything else. The meetings were wonderful, you know, it gave the residents an opportunity to speak, which they haven't had in how many years has it been since we've done a master plan? So it was great that you now have your finished product and people will be reading it, but the town traffic commission really needs to have their own open house meeting where the chief of police, who has spoken at some of the previous meetings, you know, when those aren't the issues for the planning board or the Board of Appeals. Even the issues as far as when trucks are delivering elsewhere. You know, I understand your focus is specifically within this project, and I'd love to hear those specific criteria, such as lighting. It was interesting when we talked about, or I heard talk about the brick building, and I just wanted to mention, doesn't the side of Abbey Park look wonderful? There's so many opportunities, but I did understand why the windows wanted to be high in order to give privacy. I also did want to speak because my neighbor for 30 years was the former owner. And I moved in there 35 years ago, and I heard nothing but what they were hoping would happen with this building. So I don't know if Alex could do this tonight, but as you pointed out, it's not under your jurisdiction. Don't you love that word, jurisdiction? It's not under your jurisdiction to say what goes into the building, but it would be very educational for myself as well as the town to understand some of the history as far as what the bylaws even allow. I know that I heard that if the outside surface renovations was under 800, I had heard this, that a site plan review might not have been required. So it almost seems like the developer, was willing to work with the planning board and with the residents. So if you could explain that a little bit, because I do know the former owner, was thinking of a big commercial mall, a two-story mall. And legally, couldn't a building complex, go in there, or a full apartment complex? And when you think of traffic and lighting and parking, if that was a building complex, I recall what happened on Adam Street with 2 Adam Street, how that little building, when it was being constructed, the neighbors were going crazy worrying about all the extra traffic. So a building complex or an apartment complex, would they have to have a site plan? Would they have to go to the planning board? Would they have to go to the Board of Appeals? I think it would be really educational. I know, Alex, you probably have that all covered, that you could just summarize it pretty briefly.
Well, you may recall that initially, the business district gave the board, the zoning for the business district gave the responsibility for determining parking for businesses locating in the business district to the Board of Appeals. And they had special permit authority where a building was too close to a lot line, and they could grant a special permit on for various reasons. So they have the ability to determine how much parking and the ability to grant a special permit. And of course, if you can grant a special permit, you can always condition it. And so the Board of Appeals has a wide range of opportunity to shape this project in the way they would like to see it shaped. Whether or not they take up that opportunity is something the Board of Appeals will have to decide. Site plan approval, we added to the bylaw after the Board of Appeals had this authority, and a while ago, we added a provision that said construction, reconstruction, or alteration of more than 800 square feet of a commercial building shall be in conformity with the site plan. And then there is an exception for interior renovation work that makes no change in the exterior of a building is exempted. But my view on the interior renovation work that was intended to be covered by this is when you put up a new ceiling or you change not when you gut the building and reconstruct it. So site plan approval is something added to the applicant's burden here. And site plan approval basically involves design, the design of the parking, not how many spaces they're going to be, the design of it. Whether or not, valet parking, it seems to me, can be said to be part of site plan approval, assuming the Board of Appeals doesn't determine it to be part of parking. And we are working. It isn't. People are coming out twice as much as they probably should have to, but at least they're getting the input from 2 different boards. But we're dealing with design here, and we want to get the best possible design for this project. And
Does that include the tree planting?
it would include tree plantings.
Because there do seem to be a lot of trees. Can you just briefly explain, because when I heard about demolishing the whole building, what the other,
It would
the
have
scenario,
to-
if it was an
would have to
apartment
be a business.
complex.
They cannot build an apartment complex there because it's not zoned for apartments. They
So it'd
could,
be a-
they could ask for rezoning, they could do 40B, but it's not zoned for apartments. It's
So a
zoned for
commercial,
business.
commercial
And-
business could go in
Right.
there? And would that have to have a site plan review?
Yes.
Okay.
That would definitely have to, because that would be, no one could even claim that it was just renovation.
Well, I thank you because, it's a learning experience, so you've answered a few of my questions, and I do personally know the Falcones, and, it's been interesting that they were always so quiet behind Abbey Park in the building that they own and they take such good care of, that it was amazing how many people didn't realize who they were in town, So, enough was said just by that alone. But I do think we need that traffic commission meeting.
Okay, now we're going to, it's 9 o'clock, everyone wants to go home, and we're going to continue this hearing until the 22nd of January at 6:45.
Excellent.
And that having been said,
Second.
all in favor? We're adjourned.